What would you do if one day your younger brother threatened the life of your 8-month-old baby? I've been in that exact situation. My younger brother, in an attempt to force our parents to give him money to buy a car, heartlessly used my baby's life as leverage. He threatened our parents, trying to pressure them into handing over the money. During the struggle and chaos, my daughter, just 8 months old, got hurt. But why did my brother do something like that? Was he mentally unstable? And how did I handle it all? Let me tell you the whole story. Here's what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Luna Miller, and I'm 30, a mother who lives with a quiet, constant anxiety. I live with my husband, David, and our 4-year-old daughter in a 3-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. The place isn't prominent, but cozy enough for our little family. On the surface, our life looks pretty standard. I work at an insurance company. David is a nurse at the local hospital, and Eliza is a healthy, bright little girl. But behind that calm appearance, I know I'm not like other moms. Every night before bed, I check the front door lock 3 times. I always ensure the security cameras are working and the windows are tightly locked. David sometimes reminds me that I worry too much, but he understands the reasons for these routines. Every time I see Eliza sleeping peacefully, her tiny hands clutching her teddy bear, I can't help but think back to those nights 3 years ago. Back then, she was only 8 months old, and we were still living in a big house in Gastonia with my parents. That was when I still believed family was the safest place on earth, where people would always protect one another. And as I'm telling you the story, a familiar feeling rises in me again, some mix of regret and fear. I regret not listening to David from the start and trusting too much in family ties, but I'm also afraid the past might come back and the protection I'm trying to build for Eliza might not be strong enough. To help you understand the story better, I need to take you back to 7 years ago when David and I had just married. At the time, we had plans to rent a small apartment in Charlotte, about a 2-hour drive from the family farm. I landed a solid job at an insurance company, and David secured a nurse position at the local hospital. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But a week before our planned move, my father, Dennis, said something over dinner that changed everything. Luna, could you and David stay with us a bit longer? The house has felt so empty since Cameron left for college. I could hear the loneliness in his voice. Dennis Miller, a strong man, suddenly sounded old and worn down. Cameron, my younger brother, had been away at college in California for 2 years, and his absence had made the house feel too big and too quiet for my dad. When I discussed the idea with David, he was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at me with a concerned expression and carefully said, "I know you want to help your parents, but I have a bad feeling about this." At the time, I assumed David was worried about losing our privacy. I had told him plenty of stories about Cameron growing up, how he used to have uncontrollable outbursts, how our parents always defended him, even when he was clearly in the wrong. David once pointed out that Cameron seemed a bit too spoiled, but I had always stood up for him. In the end, my love for my parents outweighed everything else. I told my dad the next day, "Dad, we'll stay. David and I will stay a little longer." After I said that, the relieved sigh that came from him made me believe I'd made the right decision. I thought living together would be suitable for everyone. My parents would have company. We'd save money on rent, and once we had a baby, they could help care for the child. In that moment, I had no idea what was coming. I thought it would bring happiness. David warned me, but I didn't listen. During our first year living with my parents, life was pretty harmonious. David and I had our room upstairs while my parents stayed on the first floor. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of coffee and toast coming from the kitchen, where my mom was always up early, making breakfast for the whole family. On weekends, my dad and I would care for the farm together. He taught me how to fix machinery and shared life lessons he'd learned. Those moments made me feel like I was finally building a deeper connection with the father who had always been too busy for me when I was a kid. At first, David was a little reserved, but he gradually warmed up to my mom. They often cooked together, talked about work, and shared stories about their families. My mom adored David and proudly told the neighbors about her kind and intelligent son-in-law. We'd usually gather in the living room to watch TV together in the evenings. Dad would tell stories about his younger days, and Mom would reminisce about Cameron and me growing up. David listened with genuine interest, occasionally asking questions about our family. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter. Cameron would call home on weekends to talk about his college life in California. Every time Mom heard his voice over the phone, her face lit up. She'd eagerly ask about his classes and his health. On the other hand, Dad focused on the cost of living and often reminded Cameron to stay focused and work hard to be worthy of the family's investment in him. Looking at the peace and harmony in our home, after a year of living together, I believed we'd made the right decision by staying. But then everything started to change when Cameron suddenly came back. Even though it's been years, I still remember that afternoon clearly. A Friday near the end of August. Around 5 p.m., while David and I were in the kitchen preparing dinner, we heard a taxi pull up at the gate. Through the kitchen window, I saw a familiar figure step out with a large backpack on his shoulder. I realized Cameron had come home unannounced. When I saw my brother, I rushed to the door and asked in surprise, "Cameron, what are you doing here? Didn't the new semester start?" After my question, he gave a faint, awkward smile and answered evasively, "Just came home for a visit. I missed everyone." Right after he said that, my mom, Bonnie, suddenly appeared from the living room, her eyes lighting up with joy at the sight of Cameron. She hurried over, wrapped him in a hug, and said emotionally, "My boy, why didn't you tell me you were coming? I would have gotten everything ready." My dad came in from the yard at that moment. With a slightly suspicious look, he asked Cameron directly, "What about school? Why are you home right now?" When Dad asked, Cameron dodged the question again, saying he had a few days off and wanted to visit the family. His answer raised some doubts, but no one asked anything more. We didn't think much of it in the first few days after Cameron came home, but a week passed, and he still did not intend to return to school. Finally, during a tense dinner, my dad slammed his fork and knife on the table and asked sternly, "Cameron, you need to tell me the truth. What happened at school?" Pushed to his limit, Cameron finally confessed, his voice trembling, "I got expelled." After he said that, the air in the room froze. My dad turned pale as he realized the $80,000 the family had spent over the past 3 years had all led to this expulsion. Feeling furious at being deceived, my dad roared, "Why? Why did you get expelled?" Cameron hesitated for a moment, then admitted he had gotten into a fight and assaulted his dorm roommate. What made it worse was that he had been arrested and now had a minor criminal record for assault. When David heard that, he looked at me with a worried expression. That night, he spoke earnestly. "Luna, I want you to install cameras inside the house. I don't feel safe." As for Cameron, although my dad was furious about the money and the damage to the family's reputation, he ultimately still let Cameron stay in the house. At the time, I had no idea that decision would open the nightmare David had already predicted. After Dad allowed Cameron to stay in the house, he acted friendly with everyone, especially David. He'd greet him with a bright smile every morning at breakfast and ask about his work. Sometimes he even helped carry heavy things for him or offered to clean up after meals. But a few days in, I noticed a subtle shift in David's demeanor. One night after we'd gone to our room, he carefully told me, "Luna, the way Cameron looks at you, it feels off. Those looks make me uncomfortable." I immediately brushed it off and told him, "You're overthinking it. Cameron's just trying to be friendly." At the time, I thought my husband was being too sensitive. Cameron was my brother, and I believed he was trying to reconnect with the family after being away for so long. But then Cameron's behavior started causing tension in the house. He often stayed up until 2 or 3 in the morning, blasting music in his room. His room shared a wall with ours, affecting our sleep. On top of that, he started leaving his stuff everywhere. Dirty dishes were left in the sink, clothes were thrown on the living room sofa, and the shared bathroom was constantly filthy after he used it. 2 weeks after he'd moved in, I had to sit Cameron down and remind him about the basic house rules. When I told him to keep the music down and clean up after using common areas, he snapped back. "This is my house too, just like it's yours. I don't need anyone telling me what to do." That small argument led to Dad stepping in. Hearing us going back and forth, he came out from the living room and said firmly, "That's enough. You're both my children, but there needs to be discipline in this house." Mom, on the other hand, kept taking Cameron's side. She'd often tell me, "Cameron just got home. He's still adjusting. Luna, you need to be patient with him." Those little conflicts kept happening day after day. The air in the house grew heavier, like a storm was about to break. 8 months after Cameron came home, Eliza was born. It was the happiest moment of my life, holding my tiny daughter in my arms for the first time. David was by my side, exhausted but glowing, while I couldn't take my eyes off our baby's angelic face. When we brought Eliza home, my parents were already waiting, fully prepared with baby supplies. My mom had turned the small room next to ours into the perfect nursery with a brand new wooden crib and colorful toys. From day one, my parents seemed energized. Mom spent all day holding Eliza, singing lullabies, and caring for her as if she were her child. Dad proudly bragged to the neighbors about his first grandchild, his eyes lighting up every time he looked at Eliza. In those first few weeks, the whole house revolved around the baby. Dinner table conversations were all about Eliza. Did she sleep well today? Did she smile yet? Even the most minor changes in her expressions became our favorite topics. But I soon noticed that Cameron wasn't happy about Eliza's arrival. At first, he acted like he cared, occasionally asking how the baby was doing. But Cameron's attitude shifted once he saw that our parents were giving their granddaughter all their time and affection. The first incident happened when Eliza was 3 months old. That day, David was bottle feeding her in the living room. As Cameron walked by, he picked up a teddy bear from Eliza's toy basket, pretended to inspect it, then suddenly dropped it on the floor. When David looked up, Cameron said casually, "Oops, I dropped it. Didn't mean to." But the look in David's eyes when he told me about it made it clear. He didn't believe it was an accident. That night, he spoke anxiously. "I feel like Cameron did that purposefully. The way he looks at Eliza makes me uneasy." Cameron's negative comments about Eliza started to become more frequent. Every time the baby cried, he would snap at my parents. "Why is she always crying, making noise all over the house?" Or when he saw that my parents had given the nicest room to be used as the nursery, he muttered, "Why does she get the best room? She's a baby. She doesn't even know the difference." Things got worse when Cameron started asking for money. One night he approached Dad and pleaded, "Dad, I need money to buy a car. I want to find a job, but cannot get around." Faced with this unreasonable request, my dad looked at him seriously and replied, "If you want to work, be independent. I already paid for your college. Now you need to figure things out on your own." That answer infuriated him. But in front of my dad, a stern man, he didn't dare show his anger. After being turned down by Dad, Cameron came to David and me. One evening, he showed up at our room and begged, "Luna, I need to borrow $5,000 to buy a car. I swear I'll pay it back once I get a job." After he pleaded, I glanced at David to see what he thought. I saw him shake his head slightly. I turned to Cameron and said firmly, "We just had a baby. Expenses are high. You'll have to figure it out on your own." From that day on, I noticed a clear shift in Cameron's attitude. How he looked at Eliza was no longer indifferent. It turned into something resentful. At the time, I didn't realize it, but inside him, a time bomb had started ticking. For days before everything happened, the warning signs became more obvious. David kept telling me about Cameron's strange behavior whenever I wasn't home. One Tuesday afternoon, while I was working late, David called me, his voice uneasy. "Luna, today I saw Cameron standing by Eliza's crib for a long time. When I asked him, he said he wanted to watch the baby sleep. I tried to reassure him, telling him maybe Cameron just wanted to feel close to his niece. But deep down, I started to feel unsettled too. And just 2 days later, things got worse. That night, David woke up at 2:00 a.m. to feed Eliza and found Cameron standing inside the nursery. The hallway light cast a disturbing silhouette of him beside the baby's crib. Seeing how strange Cameron looked, David gathered his courage, walked in, and took Eliza back to our room. At 2:30 a.m., he woke me up, trembling. I asked Cameron what he was doing, but he just stared at me with this weird look and walked out without saying a word. After hearing David tell me these things twice, I started to feel truly uneasy about my younger brother. When I confronted Cameron about it the next morning, he said, "I was just checking to see if the baby was okay. What's wrong with caring about my niece?" But when I told Mom about David's concerns, she immediately defended him. She insisted, "Cameron just wants to play with the baby. David's overthinking." Still, the unease in my chest kept growing. That same day, I ordered a set of security cameras to install in Eliza's room. I told David it would help us keep an eye on the baby and give us proof if anything ever happened. But the cameras wouldn't arrive until the following week, and I didn't realize time had already run out. Tension in the house hit its peak on Friday night. I was woken up by shouting downstairs. Dad and Cameron were having a heated argument in the living room. I crept down the stairs and overheard Cameron yelling, "All you care about is your granddaughter. What about me? I'm your son too." Dad snapped back, furious. "You had your chance. I spent $80,000 on your college, and what did you do? Got kicked out for assault." As soon as Dad brought up the past, Cameron exploded. I need money to buy a car so I can work, but you spend everything on that kid. The fight dragged on for nearly an hour before exhausted Dad finally returned to his room. Cameron stayed in the living room alone. Through the crack in the door, I could see the bitterness and hopelessness on his face. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had a sinking feeling that something terrible was about to happen. David tossed and turned beside me, whispering occasionally, "I'm scared, Luna. I have a horrible feeling." By then, my husband had already warned me more than once, and if I had listened to him from the beginning, maybe things would have turned out differently. I had no idea that just one day later, my daughter would be in danger. The next morning on a Saturday, I had to work an extra hour to finish a critical report while David planned to go grocery shopping for the new week. Eliza, who was 8 months old then, would stay home with my mom as usual. Before leaving, I kissed my daughter on the forehead and told my mom, "Please take care of Eliza for me. I'll be back soon." Holding Eliza in her arms, she smiled and replied, "Don't worry, we'll be just fine." Dad was getting ready to head out to the backyard to fix the sprinkler system that had broken the day before. He put on his old work clothes and carried a toolbox outside. Cameron was still asleep as usual. He wouldn't be up until almost noon. David and I left the house together at 8 a.m. He drove to the grocery store, and I headed to the office. Neither of us knew this would be the last time we left that house feeling at peace. According to what my mom told us later, around 9 a.m., Cameron came down to the living room with a scowl on his face. At the time, Mom was feeding Eliza milk in her high chair, and the baby giggled when she saw her. As soon as Cameron appeared, he said to her irritably, "Mom, I need to talk to you about the car." Still focused on feeding Eliza, she calmly replied, "Eat breakfast first. We'll talk about that later." But Cameron wouldn't drop it. He stepped closer and raised his voice. "No, I need money right now. You have to convince Dad to lend me money for the car." At that point, Mom started feeling uneasy about his tone. She turned to him and said firmly, "You heard what your father said. If you want a car, you'll have to earn it yourself." Something about her answer made Cameron snap. His face went pale, his eyes bloodshot like an animal cornered. Suddenly, he lunged forward and screamed, "You care more about that kid than your son." Before my mom could react, Cameron grabbed Eliza from the high chair. The baby was yanked so suddenly that she let out a terrified scream. Mom stood up in panic and begged, "Cameron, what are you doing? Put her down." But Cameron held Eliza tightly and shouted, "No, unless you give me money for the car, I'll hurt this baby." As my mom rushed forward to take Eliza back, Cameron jerked away. Eliza's tiny arm twisted unnaturally in the struggle, leaving an apparent bruise. Her cries turned into a scream of pain. The chaos inside finally reached the backyard. Dad heard Eliza screaming and my mom shouting. He dropped his tools and ran inside. When he saw what was happening, my dad lost it. He shouted, furious, "Cameron, put her down now!" Without waiting for a response, Dad charged forward and punched him square in the face. Cameron collapsed, his grip loosening. Mom rushed in and grabbed Eliza, who was still screaming. At that very moment, David and I had just returned. I had finished work earlier than expected, and he was done shopping. We heard the yelling from inside and ran in. What we saw hit me like lightning. Cameron on the floor, blood streaming from his nose, Mom holding a crying Eliza, and Dad trembling with his fist still clenched. David immediately rushed to check on Eliza and spotted the bruise on her arm. He cried out, "Luna, Eliza's hurt!" Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Cameron shouted in desperation from the floor, "You've always taken her side. I'm nothing to this family." But by then, it was too late for words. In that moment, everything in our family shattered, and the security camera my dad had installed last month had captured it all. While I was on the phone with 911, Cameron tried to get up from the floor, blood still dripping from his nose. But before he could say anything, my dad exploded with a fury I had never seen. He pointed directly at Cameron and roared, "You think we don't know what you are? You think we're stupid?" Cameron wiped the blood from his nose and tried to explain, "Dad, But Dad didn't let him finish. His voice thundered, $80,000. I spent $80,000 on your education over 3 years. I sent you $2,000 monthly so you could study in California." Watching it all unfold, I stood frozen, the phone still waiting for the operator to respond, unable to look away as my parents confronted Cameron. My mom held Eliza tightly. She had stopped crying but was still trembling in fear. Dad went on, his voice filled with pain. "You know what? I even bought a small apartment in the city so you could move in after graduation. 2 bedrooms, fully furnished, waiting for the day you become a responsible man." Cameron turned pale when he heard that. I was also shocked. I had never heard Dad mention that apartment, but what hit me the hardest was what Dad said next. "And Luna, did you know about Cameron's criminal record?" I've known for a long time. It felt like someone punched me in the stomach. I looked at my dad in disbelief and asked, "You knew and didn't tell me?" He turned to me with a face full of guilt. I thought Cameron would change. I wanted to give him one last chance in this family. Cameron had stood up by now and tried to defend himself. "What happened at school was just an accident. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." But Dad shouted back, "An accident? You attacked a kid 2 years younger than you in the dorm, slammed his head into a wall because he wouldn't lend you money." At that moment, I could hear David softly crying as he checked Eliza's injuries. He turned to me and said, "Luna, we need to take her to the hospital right now." The 911 operator finally picked up. "911, what's your emergency?" I immediately responded, "There's been a child assault at my home. We need police and an ambulance right away." I gave them our address and ended the call. Hearing me call the police, Cameron panicked and yelled, "Luna, don't do this. We can work this out as a family." But I was furious. Looking at the bruise on my daughter's arm, I turned to Cameron and said, "You crossed the line. You hurt my daughter." After everything that had happened, Mom finally spoke. Still holding Eliza, she sobbed, "Cameron, how could you hurt her? She's just a baby." Then Dad revealed more painful truths. "Do you even know how much we've covered up for you? Back in high school, you broke Mrs. Peterson's dog's leg. I paid for the vet and begged her not to report it." I was stunned. I remembered the incident with the dog, but my parents had always told me it was an accident. But Dad wasn't done. He added, "When you were 16, you smashed your teacher's car window because of a bad grade. I paid for the damages and begged them not to call the police." Cameron completely lost control. He screamed, "Why do you never trust me? Why do you always see me as the bad guy?" David had called the ambulance and returned to Eliza's side. The injury wasn't serious, but he wanted to ensure there was no internal damage. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Dad looked at Cameron with a heartbroken expression and said, "I've given you too many chances. Today you hurt an innocent child. That's enough." Mom was still crying, clutching Eliza as she whispered, "I was wrong to protect you. I let you become this." As I looked at the scene in front of me, Cameron bleeding, my parents broken, my husband and daughter hurt, I felt a wave of rage and guilt. Everything Dad said that day cut like a blade through every illusion I had held onto, and I realized I had failed to protect my family. The sound of police sirens grew louder, but the argument was still raging inside our home. Suddenly, my mother handed Eliza to David and grabbed my hand. With tears streaming down her face, she pleaded, "Luna, I'm begging you. Don't let them arrest Cameron. He's your brother." Looking at her, my heart twisted. This was the strongest woman I knew, now begging me. But my resolve hardened when I turned to Eliza in David's arms and saw the bruise on her tiny arm. Dad stepped up and placed a hand on my shoulder. His voice was hoarse as he said, "Luna, maybe we should handle this within the family. Calling the police could ruin Cameron's future." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything that had just happened, after all the truths that had been exposed, Dad still wanted to protect Cameron. It was the same pattern our family had always followed. Hide it, cover it up, hope it goes away on its own. After their words, I shook my head firmly. "No, Dad, this can't be covered up anymore." Cameron spoke from the corner of the room. "Luna, I'm sorry. I'll never do anything like that again." Those words, those same apologies, I had heard them so many times. Whenever Cameron got into trouble, he'd say the same thing, and every time, the family forgave him. But this time, David spoke up, his voice steady and sharp. "There is no next time. Eliza could have died today." His words hit all of us like a slap in the face. None of us could deny it. If Dad hadn't intervened, if we had come home just a little later, who knows what could have happened to our daughter. The car doors slammed shut outside. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the door. 2 officers and an EMT team stood on the front porch. Chief Raymond, a middle-aged man with a stern face, stepped inside and asked who had made the call. I raised my hand and explained what had happened. While the paramedics checked Eliza, the officers took statements from everyone. Cameron was read his rights and handcuffed. As they led him toward the door, my mother broke down, screaming like a wounded animal. Dad stood silently, watching Cameron being taken away, his face aging by 10 years in just a few minutes. The home that once overflowed with laughter was now drowning in tears and an eerie, crushing silence. From that moment on, there was no going back for my family. 1 hour after Cameron was arrested, we arrived at the Gastonia police station. The small interrogation room with its gray walls and cold metal table felt like the setting of a nightmare. Officer Raymond, a sharp-eyed man, sat across from us with a thick folder in front of him. David held Eliza in his arms. She had fallen asleep after everything that happened. The bruise on her little arm was still clearly visible, and every time I looked at it, a wave of anger surged through me. Thankfully, after being checked by the medics at home, it was confirmed that she only had a bruise and didn't need to go to the hospital. Officer Raymond began taking our statements. I recounted everything. How Cameron ripped Eliza from my mother's hands, the baby's terrified screams, the injury to her tiny arm. Every detail I recalled felt like a knife to the heart. David spoke about the warning he had given in the past few weeks, how Cameron had appeared in Eliza's room late at night, the strange looks, and the constant sense of unease he couldn't shake. His voice trembled as he recalled those moments when he had tried to warn me and I hadn't listened. In the room next door, Cameron was giving his statement. According to Officer Raymond, Cameron claimed he had lost control for a moment and had no intention of hurting Eliza. He said he just wanted to get the family's attention, that picking up the baby was only a way to make people notice him, not to cause harm. That weak excuse only made me angrier. Cameron still didn't grasp the seriousness of what he had done. He still treated threatening an 8-month-old child as if it were some twisted plea for attention. My parents were also at the station, but were placed in a separate room. My mother hadn't stopped crying since we arrived, pleading with the officers to go easy on Cameron. She talked about his difficult childhood, the challenging circumstances he was born into, and the pressure he had always felt. But when Officer Raymond asked if I wanted to drop the charges, I firmly shook my head. Looking at Eliza sleeping in David's arms, I knew I couldn't let Cameron walk away from this. If I did nothing today, what might happen when Eliza is older tomorrow? What shocked me most was when Officer Raymond opened the file and revealed this wasn't the first report involving Cameron. When he was 18, there had been an incident at school. He assaulted a younger student over an argument. At the time, my parents had gone in, apologized, and paid damages to keep it from escalating. There was also the case with Mrs. Peterson's dog, the one Dad had mentioned. When Cameron was 16, he broke the dog's leg because it barked too loudly. Mrs. Peterson was going to file a report, but my dad had begged her and paid for the vet bills. Hearing this, I realized Cameron's pattern of violence had existed for a long time. Our family had only been enabling him, covering up his behavior, helping him avoid real consequences. Officer Raymond documented everything thoroughly, from our testimonies to Eliza's medical record. He said the case would be forwarded to the district attorney for possible prosecution. When we left the station late that evening, I knew life would never be the same. Cameron would spend the night in holding, waiting to appear in court the next day. From then on, Cameron was no longer just a son in our family. He was a defendant with a criminal record. The next day, when David took Eliza to the hospital for a follow-up checkup, we faced a new challenge, one we had never anticipated. Child Protective Services had been notified of the incident and sent a caseworker to intervene. Sarah Johnson, a woman in her early 40s with short hair and a serious expression, arrived at Dr. Miller's clinic just as we finished Eliza's evaluation. The bruise on our daughter's arm, while not medically severe, was visible and enough to serve as evidence of child abuse. Dr. Miller ordered x-rays and confirmed there were no fractures or internal injuries. However, the bruise was photographed in detail from multiple angles. These images would become a key part of Cameron's legal file. Sarah Johnson conducted separate interviews with me and David in different rooms. She wanted to ensure our statements were consistent and uninfluenced by each other. The interview lasted over 2 hours with detailed questions about Eliza's living environment, Cameron's history, and our ability to protect our child. David had to answer questions about how he had reported his concerns to me, why we hadn't acted sooner, and whether he believed Eliza would be safe continuing to live in the same home as Cameron. The questions were painful. My husband was forced to admit that he had not felt secure in his home with me. Sarah focused on why I hadn't believed David's warnings, why I allowed Cameron to keep living with us even after learning about his criminal record. Each question cut deep, forcing me to confront the reality that I had failed to protect my daughter. The result of the initial investigation shocked us. Sarah Johnson informed us that for Eliza's safety, we were required to move out of our current home immediately. If we continued to live under the same roof as Cameron once he was released, CPS would consider removing Eliza from our custody. That meant we had 1 week to find a new place to live, and we had to prove Cameron would have no access to Eliza. CPS also issued a complete no-contact order. Cameron was forbidden from seeing or communicating with Eliza until the court decided. Sarah Johnson became our main point of contact with the legal system. She would conduct regular welfare checks, assess the new environment we created for Eliza, and report her findings to the court to help determine whether we were fit to continue parenting. Being under CPS supervision felt like having my role as a mother stripped away. Every decision regarding Eliza, from choosing a preschool to arranging a playdate, had to be reported and approved. Our family's private life suddenly became the subject of a massive bureaucratic system. David had to take a week off work to handle the move and find a new home. I also had to request time off from the company to deal with the legal paperwork. The cost of hiring a lawyer, renting a new place, and covering all related legal fees quickly strained us financially. Not just the law, but now society itself was watching my family. Within 3 days of CPS issuing their mandate, David and I found a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, about a 2-hour drive from the family farm. The urgency of the situation forced us to accept a rental price higher than we had budgeted for, but at the very least, it gave Eliza the safety she needed. The moving process was tense, weighed down by a heavy, eerie silence. My parents stood by as we packed our things, their faces filled with sorrow as I gathered important documents, Eliza's birth certificate, insurance papers, and most importantly, the memory card from the security camera. My father looked at me with disappointment. My mother, her eyes swollen from crying, came up to me. She held my hand and pleaded, "Luna, I'm begging you, don't testify against Cameron." I gently pulled my hand away and shook my head. I replied, "Mom, I have to protect Eliza. I don't have a choice." David quietly packed Eliza's clothes, folding each item carefully, as if preparing for a journey without a clear end. Every so often, he paused to wipe away tears, especially when he came across the gifts Mom and Dad had bought for our daughter. That afternoon, a rental truck took away the last of our belongings. When I locked the door to the room where we once hoped to build a happy family, I knew this chapter of our lives was closed for good. My parents stood in the yard, watching as we pulled away. In the rearview mirror, I saw my mother wrap her arms around my father and sob uncontrollably. My chest tightened, but deep down, I knew we had made the right decision. We didn't just leave to protect Eliza. We left to protect ourselves from the blindness of family loyalty. Cameron's trial was held at the county courthouse 2 weeks after the incident. Due to the severity of the case, the court had scheduled the hearing earlier than usual. That day, I sat in the witness section, my heart pounding as I looked at my younger brother seated at the defendant's table, wearing a wrinkled gray suit. Cameron had lost a lot of weight during his time in custody. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. Cameron's lawyer, a middle-aged man with experience handling family cases, began by painting him as a young man in psychological crisis. He emphasized that Cameron's actions resulted from a momentary loss of control, not a genuine intent to harm Eliza. He spoke about the pressure Cameron felt after being expelled from school, the sense of abandonment by his family, and how Eliza had taken the attention Cameron once received. The defense argued this was a youthful mistake, not a serious criminal act. But Prosecutor Martinez had come fully prepared. She presented footage from the security camera, clearly showing Cameron deliberately using Eliza as leverage to get what he wanted. She pointed out that Cameron didn't just snatch the baby impulsively. He threatened to harm her unless his demands were met. She also submitted evidence of Cameron's violent pattern in the past, the assault on a college classmate, the incident with the neighbor's dog, and signs of aggression going back to his teenage years that the family had covered up. When I was called to the stand, my legs felt heavy as lead. Standing before the court, looking down at Cameron with his head bowed, it took me a few seconds to find my voice. I told the whole story in detail, from the moment Cameron ripped Eliza from my mother's arms, to the sound of my daughter's terrified screams, to the bruise left on her tiny arm. Each memory felt like a knife to the chest, but I knew I had to speak the truth. Throughout my testimony, Cameron never looked up. My mother sat behind him, crying nonstop, wiping her face with a tissue. My father sat beside her, stone-faced, unmoving, expressionless. The most emotional moment came when my mother was allowed to address the court in a plea for leniency. She stood trembling before the judge, voice breaking as she spoke about Cameron's difficult childhood, about giving birth to him late in life and nearly losing her own. She begged the court to give Cameron one last chance, promising the family would monitor him closely and get him into therapy. But her plea couldn't erase the image of the bruise on Eliza's arm, now sealed in the evidence files. When the judge asked my father if he wanted to say anything, he shook his head and remained still. His silence said more than words could. He was done protecting Cameron. After deliberation, the judge delivered the verdict. Since Eliza's injuries were deemed minor and left no lasting damage, Cameron was sentenced to a 2-year suspended sentence, 3 years of probation, and a restraining order prohibiting any contact with Eliza until the child turns 18. The judge also ordered Cameron to undergo mandatory psychological counseling and anger management throughout his probation. When the sentence was read, my mother collapsed into her seat in tears. Cameron remained silent, as if he hadn't fully processed what had happened. As for me, even though I knew it was a fair outcome, I couldn't shake the deep, aching pain of watching my family completely fall apart. After the hearing, we left the courthouse in silence. My parents returned to the farm alone. Cameron went under the terms of his probation, and David and I drove back to our apartment with Eliza. That verdict didn't just mark the end of Cameron's fate. It forever closed the home we once called family. 3 years have passed since that day in court. Eliza is now 4 years old, tall, strong, and full of energy, with no trace of the bruise she once carried. The 3-bedroom apartment we live in today is a gift from my parents, given to us after they sold the family farm. It was their way of expressing remorse and asking for forgiveness, even if no one ever said the words out loud. The apartment is spacious, with 1 room for Eliza, 1 for us, and 1 already prepared for our 2nd child who's on the way. I am 6 months pregnant. I often sit on the couch, gently stroking my belly, smiling as I watch Eliza play outside. Our life now is peaceful and steady, made even warmer by my parents' regular visits every weekend. Every Saturday, they drive an hour from their small town to see us. Dad always brings toys for Eliza while Mom cooks the dishes we used to enjoy back at the farm. Eliza is especially close to them. She calls them Grandpa Dennis and Grandma Bonnie in her sweet little voice. On weekend afternoons, I often see my dad sitting on the floor building Lego sets with Eliza or reading her picture books. How he looks at Eliza, so full of love, yet shadowed by a deep, quiet guilt, says more than words ever could. He knows now that protecting Eliza must come first, and he respects my decision years ago. Occasionally, my mom asks if we've considered letting Cameron see Eliza. I always decline kindly but firmly. The no contact order is still in place, and more importantly, I'm not ready to take that risk. After completing his probation, Cameron moved back to California where he once attended college. He's trying to start over in Los Angeles, looking for work and building a new life. My mom hears from him now and then. From what she says, he's trying to change. I don't know if Cameron has genuinely changed. I only hope the physical distance between us gives us time to heal. Maybe years from now, when Eliza is old enough to understand and strong enough to protect herself, we'll revisit everything with clearer eyes. But as I watched Eliza run toward me, her face glowing with joy, I knew that protecting her was the right decision. Families may fracture, people may change, but the love and safety we build for our children, that's what truly matters. In this apartment, with Eliza's laughter, David's smile, and my parents' quiet presence on the weekends, I found what it means to protect a family. That's where my story ends. But before I close, I want to ask you one question. Was I too cruel for deciding to press charges against my brother? And if you were in my position, what would you have done? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it so more people can learn the importance of setting boundaries even within family. Thank you for taking the time to follow my story.